Okay, we're reading The Divided Mind, page 34. Page 34. But at the same time, human biology is not exclusively mechanical, and there are limits to what the laboratory can accurately study. The laboratory study of infectious diseases has been magnificent. It is very straightforward, but its very success has deflected attention from the influence of emotions. As a result, medical research has failed abysmally in many areas. The evidence is everywhere you look. Pain problems have become epidemic. Gastrointestinal, dermatologic, and allergic conditions are increasingly widespread, all because of laboratory identification of the physics and chemistry of these conditions does not, contrary to popular medical belief, identify their cause. And paradoxically, wonderful new diagnostic tools like the MRI often contribute to misdiagnosis when doctors misinterpret the significance of findings. The methods of the laboratory may be impeccable, but are wasted if the interpretation of their finding is faulty. The failure of scientific medicine to stem the tide of chronic pain disorders is unfortunate enough, but it has failed as well in another even more crucial sphere. There is abundant anecdotal evidence in the medical literature that psychological factors influence more serious disorders like those of the autoimmune group, cardiovascular conditions, and cancer. Yet scientific medicine has paid scant attention to this evidence in its research, with the National Institutes of Health conspicuous in its indifference. Put bluntly, emotional factors should be studied as risk factors in these life-threatening disorders, and they are not. Another trend is contemporary scientific medicine. Is it preoccupation with studying and the anatomy, physiology, and chemistry of the brain at the expense of studying its dynamic relationship to the body as a whole? Neuroscience can be enormously important and of consuming interest, but what is learned of the physical brain may be either detrimental or irrelevant to clinical medicine. An example of the former, so this is talking about the mind-body connection, and one of the most important sentences in this page is that modern medicine is failing to link how emotions can cause physical symptoms. So check out this sentence. Pain problems have become epidemic. Gastrointestinal, dermatologic, and allergic conditions are increasingly widespread, all because the laboratory identification of the physics and chemistry of these conditions does not, contrary to popular medical belief, identify their cause. Okay, moving on to page 35. An example of the former is the almost universal tendency to treat the chemical aberrations associated with depression with drugs. Man, there are a lot of people who have depression who are being treated with drugs. And we know that that can't be good. The former is the almost universal tendency to treat the chemical aberrations associated with depression with drugs, as though the altered chemistry was the cause of the depression, when in fact the reason for the depression is an unconscious psychological conflict, and the chemical change is merely the mechanism that produces the symptom of depression. Treating the depression with drugs alone without psychotherapy is not only poor medicine, it is also dangerous. The symptom imperative tells us that taking away a symptom by the use of a placebo or an antidepressant will only give rise to another symptom, and the other symptom may be related to something serious like cancer. Let's read that again. The symptom imperative tells us that taking away a symptom by the use of a placebo or antidepressant will only give rise to another symptom, and the other symptom may be related to something serious like cancer. Then too, the findings of neuroscience may be totally irrelevant to some areas of clinical medicine. For example, the fact that a positron emission tomography (PET scan) can identify areas of the brain that are activated when a person is manifesting anger is not helpful in determining the source of the anger, particularly if unconscious processes are involved. Such findings are extremely interesting, but of little use if one is trying to help a patient deal with behavioral problem. Such help can come only from the laborious process of psychological analysis conducted by someone appropriately trained. When I am working with a patient suffering from pain induced by buried rage, it does no good to know which brain nuclei are involved in the pain process. I must help the patient to understand the source of the rage. Experience has demonstrated that such understanding will usually cure him. This very interesting and germane process will be explained in Chapter 4. Neuroscience is one of the contemporary glamour specialties of research medicine, thanks to some extent to the interest of people like Dr. Gerald M. Elderman and the late Francis Crick, both Nobelists in other fields. Their studies of the neurocorrelates of consciousness are of enormous interest, comparable to the fascinating work being done by cosmologists and astrophysicists, but of little relevance to clinical medicine, particularly where emotions are involved. An article in the May 2004 issue of Natural History illustrates beautifully the limitations of laboratory findings. The author, Robert M. Sapolsky, a professor of biological sciences and neurology, reported on what he identified as a landmark paper published in the journal Science. The investigators followed a population of over 1,000 New Zealand children from age 3 into young adulthood, identifying the incidence of depression and noting that a portion of the group being studied also possessed a serotonin regulating gene known as 5-HTT. The role of serotonin in depression is well known due to widely used drugs like Prozac. The investigators correlated the incidence of two variants of the 5-HTT gene and depression and found that inheriting the genes only increased the risk of depression in people. The bad gene did not produce depression in those who had not suffered major stresses. The author noted, "We all have a responsibility to create environments that interact benignly with our genes." Another aspect of this problem was enunciated by Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote in Natural History, "An unfortunate but regrettable common stereotype about science divides the profession into two domains of different status. We have, on the one hand, the hard and physical sciences that deal in numerical prediction, and experimentation. On the other hand, soft sciences that treat the complex objects of history in all their richness must trade these virtues for mere description without firm numbers in a confusing world where at best we can hope to explain what we cannot predict. The history of life embodies all the messiness of this second and undervalued style of science." As this book was being prepared for publication, a very important medical paper appeared in the September 2005 issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. All right, so now we're on page 37 of The Divided Mind. Can you see that? The Divided Mind. This is turning out to be a very good book about how the mind can affect physical symptoms that you might be feeling. Proceedings of the National, A research team at the University of Wisconsin was able to relate activity in areas of the brain known to be involved with emotions to an inflammatory process that causes symptoms of asthma. Since we theorize that asthma is a mind-body disorder and an equivalent of TMS, this is important evidence that emotions may be a crucial factor in the causation of mind-body disorders. I tend to initiate a similar study since it is highly likely that the brains of people suffering an episode of TMS will show the same kind of changes. Neuroscience can play an important role in identifying how mind body processes work. If unconscious emotions can be identified and measured objectively, we would have so called hard data to support our clinical observations.